What are some of the dumbest scams people try to pull? Let's get right into it with number 5. They got me locked up. Security van driver Andrew Measor staged an elaborate fake robbery where he claimed he was locked up as robbers stole $1.1 million. Measor alleged that the robbers handcuffed his hands to the van's steering wheel and that he had to use his nose to call the police. In response to the seemingly traumatic event, he claimed he developed such severe PTSD that he needed to take time off from work. During his time off, Measor bragged to his friends that he was faking his PTSD. Measor handcuffed himself to the van's steering wheel and placed shopping bags filled with cash. He waited 2 hours before raising the alarm about the staged robbery, calling a Loomis depot to claim he had been the victim of a robbery at 5 a.m. that morning. Measor, with the help of his accomplice, Stefanos Kantaras, staged the scene and alleged that $1.1 million in banknotes and $18,193 in coins were stolen. It wasn't hard for law enforcement to detect something suspicious about Measor's story, especially when he was bragging to his friends about the incident. Measor faced conspiracy charges due to working with Kantaras to stage a bogus crime scene. It was a severe charge, confronting the fact that he attempted to pervert the course of justice by interfering with the investigation by lying to law enforcement and faking his PTSD. On the day of the alleged crime, Measor parked his van and placed the bags of cash in the van's airlock. Then, a white Vauxhall combo pulled up, and 2 men got out to grab the bags. Measor drove away, then parked and handcuffed himself to the steering wheel. When Measor called for help, he alleged that a man with a gun approached him, handcuffed him to the steering wheel, and fled with the money. He also stated that he had been trying to get the attention of passers-by, but nobody paid any attention to him. Measor's phone records stored incriminating evidence, which the prosecution presented to the court during his conviction. They read texts where he bragged about milking the situation and talking about how much compensation he could receive if he kept up the act. Although Measor denied his charges, he was convicted of conspiracy to steal and conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. He was acquitted of conspiracy to conceal or transfer criminal property. First, Measor was handcuffed to a truck. Now, he's handcuffed to a prison sentence. Number 4. She's not a keeper. Thelma Williams, an Ohio woman, took to social media to fake her own kidnapping in an attempt to catch her family's and her ex-boyfriend's attention after they recently ended their relationship. Williams tied herself up loosely to make it easy for her to escape, and she gagged herself with women's underwear. Hopefully they were her own. After seeing Williams's photos and videos on Facebook, her friends panicked and called 911. They told the dispatcher that someone had kidnapped Williams and hacked her Facebook. Having expressed their fear that the kidnapper would endanger Williams, the 911 dispatcher triggered a full response from the police, which included a helicopter search and shutting down a highway costing thousands of dollars. Williams claimed on her Facebook that a man named Tony had taken over her account and threatened her. She posted as Tony, making graphic comments about how he planned to torture Williams. The problem was that Williams' story wasn't adding up. According to her Facebook, her kidnapper was holding Williams in her basement. However, a local McDonald security camera caught footage of Williams in their location instead of being tied up in her basement. Williams was going through a hard breakup at the time of the incident. She struggled to deal with the emotional toll of the split and was seeking attention from her friends and family. At the time of her fake kidnapping, she claimed the intruder used her phone to record the incident and post it to her Facebook account. Williams posed as the kidnapper and posted a series of Facebook posts that caused her loved ones to be so concerned that they called the police. Authorities arrived at the scene where they found Williams in the basement, loosely tied up with her clothes. They noticed in some of her social media posts that she could be seen adjusting herself for the camera. After sending an emergency response team to Williams' home, detectives concluded that the incident was a fabrication. Sheriff Richard Jones expressed frustration with Williams' actions as they insult real victims of such crimes. Officers arrested Williams and charged her with making false alarms. She was held on a $10,000 bond. But on the flip side, she thought McDonald's crispy chicken sandwich was really good. Number 3. Meter Maid lawyer. An Australian parking ranger scammed victims out of thousands of dollars by posing as Alec Stuart, a criminal and civil lawyer. Pinnock purchased a fake law degree online and used it to lure clients. It wasn't just his clients that Pinnock convinced of his second identity. Pinnock believed he was actually Alec Stuart, likely due to his schizophrenia diagnosis. His fake qualifications helped him gain employment in Victoria and South Australia. Pinnock created a website and social media accounts to promote Stuart's services, describing himself as an unconventional solicitor who would make a difference in his clients' lives. Pinnock claimed to have 50 clients in 3 states, representing them in civil and criminal cases. Additionally, he alleged to have dealt with $1 million in money awarded and fees to those clients. While his victims paid him thousands of dollars for representation, he put the money toward a lavish lifestyle, including flying around Australia multiple times a week, driving a BMW, and staying in high-end hotels. Pinnock's fake law degree came from Charleston State University in South Carolina, but he actually purchased it from a shady website that offers fraudulent degrees for life experience. Before starting his legal career, Pinnock worked as a parking ranger in Sydney. His daily tasks included issuing penalties for illegal parking and breaches of council regulations, which was very different from his work as Stuart. Rather than posing as Stuart, Pinnock believed he was Stuart. He genuinely thought he provided helpful legal services to his clients and portrayed himself as a lawyer even after the Law Society of NSW charged him. Pinnock's world unraveled, and he became homeless after being exposed for his crimes. No matter his mental state, Pinnock was very deceptive with his clients. He would present them with a series of fake documents, such as a counterfeit Australian practicing certificate and a fake certificate of fitness and good standing. Pinnock also never had his law degree validated, and the website where he obtained it didn't provide any study or verifications, leaning on life and job experience instead. Still, Pinnock's lack of studying didn't stop him from taking to Facebook to brag about his legal services and the lifestyle they afforded him. He would post updates detailing false courtroom deals and talk about how much he loved his job. His victims were the ones supporting his lavish expenses. One of his victims, Yvonne Borg, paid Pinnock $7,500 to represent her in a case against her local government, which fined her $49,000 over an illegal shed. Another victim, Steve Wiseman, paid Pinnock $3,380 to represent him after Wiseman found out a piece of land he owned was being used as an illegal dumping ground. His victims weren't wealthy and often had to borrow money to afford Pinnock, who advertised himself as a lawyer who would fight for their rights over anything else. The Law Society of New South Wales eventually uncovered Pinnock's elaborate scheme and charged him with engaging in legal practice without being qualified. Pinnock pleaded guilty and was fined $3,500 and given a community corrections order instead of serving jail time. He's like that guy on Split, except his dangerous personality gives bad legal advice, while his other just gives you annoying parking tickets. Number 2. Numbers Game. Teenager Dennis Sue from Sydney, Australia, used stolen personal information to demand money via text messages. Sue gained access to the personal information of Uppp customers who were victims of a massive data breach in September 2022. He sent texts to 93 Uppp customers, demanding them to transfer $2,000 into an account he controlled. When authorities learned of Sue's attempted blackmail, they charged him with using a telecommunications network with the intent to commit a serious offense and dealing with identification information. The charges carried hefty fees and high prison sentences, with a maximum combined sentence of 17 years. Optus is an Australian telecommunications company that provides mobile, broadband, and television services. It has over 10 million customers and is the second largest telecommunications provider in the country. The company experienced a devastating data breach in September 2022 when a cyber attack from unknown hackers stole customers' personal information, like their names, dates of birth, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, and financial information such as credit card detail. Although Optus warned those affected by the breach to protect their personal information, hackers posted the stolen data online, making it available to the public. Sue used the data to identify the customers from the breach and attempted to use the victim's information to blackmail them into sending him money. He sent a series of text messages demanding $2,000 to 93 Optus customers and threatened to expose the victim's personal personal information if they didn't comply. None of the text receipts sent him money, and the Australian Federal Police promptly tracked down Sue and arrested him. Sue wanted the money routed to a bank account that belonged to his 15-year-old brother, potentially to disguise the source of the funds and avoid detection. It wasn't effective. Unfortunately for Sue, running such an unsophisticated scam made it almost impossible to avoid detection. Instead of paying his ransom, his targeted victims reported his texts to authorities. On November 8, 2022, the prosecution withdrew the charges of dealing with identity information to commit an indictable offense and demand with menace intending to obtain gain. In December 2022, Sue pleaded guilty to 2 counts of using equipment connected to a network to commit a serious offense. His lawyer argued that Sue's crimes resulted from his depression and anxiety stemming from a difficult childhood. However, the judge noted that Sue's actions caused significant harm to the victims and that blackmail is too serious an offense not to receive any form of punishment. The judge sentenced Sue to an 18-month community corrections program and 100 hours of community service. Sue publicly apologized outside of court after his hearing. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned for our past release about this lady who scammed her own mom just to buy a BMW. Number 1. Like a rolling stone. In an attempt to collect injury money, a man in Hong Kong flexed his acting skills by dramatically pretending to be hit by a car. The absurd spectacle drew 155,000 views on Twitter, where viewers were unconvinced by his performance. He planned on staging the accident to receive injury money and was a type of scam referred to as porcelain, as they're so fragile they collapse at the slightest touch. The footage, filmed from the driver's dashcam, showed the driver turning a corner where she encountered the man sprinting toward her vehicle. When she saw him, she put her foot on the brake and slowed to a stop. The man jumped off the hood and rolled off before stumbling away. His performance was far from over. He dropped to the ground and rolled all over the road like a small, overacting child. It was weird. He didn't break character until paramedics arrived at the scene and walked toward him. Suddenly, his seemingly agonizing injuries were miraculously cured, and he sprinted away from the scene in case the paramedics saw through his performance. After all, he did spend an entire minute theatrically rolling on the concrete, writhing in fake pain, in a move that probably reminded many people of how soccer players dramatically flop to the ground during a match. What's worse, scamming your own mom just to buy a new car to flex on social media, or running a Ponzi scheme and scamming money from all the people around you? Let's start with number 5, mom's new car. In 2018, Heidi Carruthers bought a shiny new BMW for £42,000 with her mom's help. The problem here is that the role of her mom was played by someone else. The misrepresented mom didn't find out about anything until she was later contacted about the car payments falling behind. Carruthers is a serial offender. Her rap sheet has a whopping 79 previous offenses, 34 of which ended in convictions. The 35-year-old wasn't expected to see much mercy from the court when it all came to light. When the case was addressed in court earlier in 2022, all signs pointed toward Carruthers having the book thrown at her. Then her attorney, Steve Hennessy, brought forth a relevant fact. Carruthers had given birth to a daughter in 2019 and had since turned things around. Carruthers had reportedly shown remorse and embarrassment over the whole thing and supposedly had committed no other offenses since the birth of her daughter. She was also a prior user who had been clean since the pregnancy. Her lawyers claimed to the court that she was committed to remaining clean for her daughter. This argument and Carruthers' own confession and testimony were enough to sway officials. Judge Graham Smith noted that the woman being sentenced in 2022 and the offender from 2018 were, quote, 2 different people. What was supposed to be a 16-month prison sentence was changed to an 18-month suspended sentence. As part of that agreement, Carruthers was subjected to a 20-day rehab program and a 4-month curfew enforced by electronic monitoring. In cases like this, it's reasonable to expect the victim to be upset. This goes double when the victim is the offender's mother, seemingly showcasing poor parenting skills for all the world to see. On the contrary, Carruthers' mom turned up in court to support her daughter. The whole thing ended with poor mom on a credit blacklist and the financing company unable to recover most of the original amount financed. Even so, her mom indicated that she loves and supports her daughter and will stick by her. Number 4. ATM investment. Scammers Colin Voke and Amy Ploy Pittman out of Darwin, Australia, racked up about $1.9 million banking on ATMs that didn't exist, with their first victim being Pittman's father. Sources say she stole almost $300,000 from him, and dear old dad had no idea he was being led on. Such a substantial sum should be more than enough to get a legitimate ATM business off the ground. But that was never the plan. They simply told people they had a legit company and asked them to get on board. The pair hooked 17 people. Pittman roped in several victims from the hospital she worked at. She had no problem scamming her co-workers on company time. ATM ownership and the operation of the ATMs aren't all that complicated. There are several companies out there willing to help you start out. According to one of those companies, all you would need to start is a suitable location and about $5,000 to buy the machine, get it hooked up, and load it with an initial payload of cash. Pittman and her beau chose to skip this part because it was too complicated for them. You must service the ATMs, repair them, keep them loaded, and so on. These are all things that the pair didn't want to do for their investors. They did at least one semi-honest thing. They shelled out around $700,000 to pay their investors, but the money came from other investors' funds, aka it was a Ponzi scheme. Officials estimated a figure shy of $1.9 million as the ultimate take in the scam. This number included the initial $300,000 kick-in from Pittman's dad. Despite everything, he was still willing to throw down $10,000 against his daughter's bail. Even so, the courts ultimately denied bail in the case. The other victims probably didn't feel the same way, and the court suspected the victims they had proof about weren't the only ones taken in. In December of 2018, the couple pled guilty to multiple charges. This netted them each a 7.5-year sentence, 4 of which were without the possibility of parole. Number 3. Party money. Hannah Dickinson had the grim task of telling those in her life that she was facing terminal cancer. Our story began in 2012 when Hannah went to her parents asking for cash for life-saving treatment. Not long after, she needed another procedure that would happen in New Zealand. By 2013, Dickinson had stretched her parents paper thin. They began turning to friends, neighbors, associates, and anybody else who would lend a hand. Dickinson didn't go around asking on her own. Residents eventually came together to give Dickinson everything she needed. This would be a heartwarming story of a community rallying around one of their own, if it weren't a complete scam. Turns out Hannah's grim task was self-imposed and totally unnecessary. She had scammed everybody around her. There was no cancer, and none of the money that people gave to her ended up going to medical treatments. The cancer she claimed to have, it's worth noting, was a rare form that has a high survival rate and is among the easiest to cure. This meant she could claim to be healed and back out of the whole deal whenever she wanted. The whole thing is even more heinous because one of her victims was an actual cancer survivor. Fresh off his own treatment, the generous guy kicked in $10,000 out of the nearly $42,000 that Dickinson made off with in the end. She got found out in 2018 after one of her victims saw a suspicious social media post and contacted the police. Cops put out the word, and others came forward in short order. It was later revealed that she had been using the money to party it up with friends at home and abroad. Hard partying and holidays were the name of the game, all made possible by money that was supposed to be paying for life-saving medical treatments. Naturally, her travels included some serious drinking and use of illegal substances, both of which were a constant in her brief new life. This ended up playing into her case later on. When her entire fake story shattered in 2018, Dickinson landed in court. Officials saddled her with 7 charges of obtaining property by deception. Despite just how brazen her crimes were, one person saw good in her still, her lawyer, Beverly Lindsay. The defense brought up the case of a health blogger, Belle Gibson, who was ultimately saddled with a $400,000 fine for misleading her readers and scamming whatever she could get out of her audience. This was all done under the guise of putting out content to help others in similar situations, which Lindsay argued made Gibson's case worse. She pleaded with the magistrate not to send Dickinson to jail. The magistrate saw things differently. Court official David Starvagi argued that Dickinson's in-your-face fraud to her own parents, no less, required swift and decisive deterrence. As such, he threw Dickinson in jail for 3 months. She also caught a 12-month community service order that amounted to 150 hours, along with court-mandated rehab. This resulted in the scammer losing her job at Little Real Estate as a property manager. At the same time frame as the original scam, it turns out that Dickinson was engaging in a much more conventional fraud. Records show she attempted to get a car loan for $30,000 using fake documents and a fake identity. As if that wasn't enough, she nabbed over $100,000 in disability payments using fake documents submitted to the local magistrate's office. The whole thing came out in 2021, and Dickinson found herself in court again. Officials were much less lenient this time. They slapped her with a sentence of at least a year for using false documentation, with more charges pending as of 2022. The car loan was reportedly not granted, making it a bit less serious. The disability payments, however, went on from 2014 to 2018 when her original case broke. Number 2. Cancer banker. Rajesh Gedia of Berkshire pocketed around £1.8 million from multiple scams, including defrauding insurance and pension companies with claims of a cancer diagnosis. The scams ran from 2016 onward and included a claim that he had been promoted to vice president at his employer, Bank of America. Gedia claimed to have aggressive pancreatic cancer, giving him a year to live. The scam, perpetrated on his pension and life insurance companies, allowed him to withdraw funds he otherwise would have had to wait quite some time for all at once. About $1.2 million of his total take came from this avenue. Along the way, Gedia had an unnamed accomplice pose as a doctor to vouch for him, and he dragged many unknowing doctors' names into the case. The other half of the story is that he claimed to be the vice president of Bank of America. He used this position to convince victims to invest in banking products and services that did not exist. Two of those victims were his cousin and his own father. Things initially came to a head with a documentation issue found in 2019. Still, he continued scamming with a new insurance company, buying and cashing a policy worth £900,000. According to officials, Gedia spent the cash on a mansion in the expensive Virginia water area of Surrey. He also got his hands on some expensive vehicle. To put the cherry on top, he sent his children to an expensive private school in the area. Whether his primary motivation was selfish greed or providing a better life for his children, he still sentenced 7 souls to financial ruin. Falsely representing both Bank of America and Goldman Sachs, Gedia scammed £600,000 from 7 different victims. His cousin, Vipul Chandegra, was out £63,000. Some £116,000 left the pockets of Per Selbeck, a local dad whose kids went to the same school as Gedia's. At a party, he met Wayne Johncock, who lost out on £181,000. Perhaps the most tragic victims were Gedia's regular taxi driver and the man's wife, Saida Ahmed. The pair lost over £100,000 to the scam. Part of it was taxes attached to the investment, which the couple borrowed around £70,000 to pay. This resulted in them losing their home. What makes this part of the story sting even worse is that he faked the death of his own daughter to get out of owning up. When Saida confronted him the first time, he concocted a car accident in the States that had his daughter hospitalized, drawing his attention from the matter at hand. When she confronted him again, he shrugged her off by saying his daughter had succumbed to her injuries. When the law finally caught up with Gedia in 2022, he was saddled with 30 fraud charges. The court showed him no mercy, and he ultimately pled guilty to 22 of those charges. Judge Deborah Taylor sympathized with the victims and painted a picture of Gedia as a man with no morals. Detective Constable Daniel Weller of London's Insurance Fraud Enforcement, Judge Taylor sentenced Gedia to a grand total of 6 years and 9 months in prison. Authorities went to work getting victims their money back, liquidating Gedia's ill-gotten assets. Number 1. Ponzi pharmacist. Natalie Cochran, 40, a pharmacist from Raleigh County, West Virginia, ran a scam that ultimately cost her victims a hefty $2 million. She used 2 companies that she owned with her husband to run an elaborate Ponzi scheme 2017 to 2019, defrauding individuals, companies, and even banks along the way. The scam centered around investments in her 2 companies, Technology Management Solutions and Tactical Solutions Group. The 2 fake companies were misrepresented to 11 people, among other victims. The investors were convinced by fake government contracts and other files produced by Cochran. She sold them on the experience, contracts, and projects her company never had. To keep the scam going, Cochran used some of the money to pay back old investors as new ones jumped on board. The classic Ponzi scheme was peppered by personal and business expenditures, some over $10,000 each. None of them pertained to any of the contracts or investments that Cochran represented. However, she used $35,000 of the money to buy a sweet 1965 Shelby Cobra, a collector's item that could be argued as an investment. the United States isn't the best place to run a Ponzi scheme, as Cochran found out in 2020. The investigation involved multiple agencies and local and federal government branches, including the Secret Service. High-stakes crimes were finally brought to light in September 2020 when Cochran pled guilty to charges involving money laundering and wire fraud. Her sentence was 11 years in prison and 3 years of supervised release. Along with jail time, Cochran has to pay back over $2.5 million to her victim. So far, asset forfeitures have barely scratched the surface. The seizure of her personal and company bank accounts only yielded $45,000. Most scam stories end when the perpetrator gets their day in court. In this case, however, things only get weirder and darker. Cochran was suspected of going after her own husband. Michael Cochran fell ill while all this was happening and reportedly died in hospice care in February. The late Michael was only 38, making natural causes a suspicious conclusion. Local investigators were struck by this fact and decided to look deeper into it. After all, if Natalie killed her co-owner husband, she would no longer have to split the loot. Additionally, that would be one less loose end. Michael's body was exhumed and an autopsy was performed. The investigation is ongoing as of 2022, leaving authorities tight-lipped on the matter. What's known is that Natalie was brought back into court in 2022, indicted for her husband's passing, and faced first-degree charges. With a not guilty plea and the trial date still pending, this is anybody's guess as to what will happen before it's all over. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather do. Live on the North Pole for a year or go to jail for 3 months.